Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where frontline sales leaders teach you how to build and scale an outbound sales team. Welcome back to the Predictable Revenue Podcast. I'm your host, Collin Stewart. Today, I'm joined by Maggie Callahan. She's the Director of Revenue Enablement over at Convercent. And today, we're talking about revenue enablement, basically how to focus. We all have shifting priorities. And if you're new to revenue enablement or, in light of all the things that are happening just with COVID-19 right now, we're at the beginning of May. From the sales leaders I'm talking to, everybody's priorities are shifting. And so whether you're shifting your priorities or you're new to an enablement role, Maggie is your girl. And she's going to talk to us about basically how to do that. Before we jump in, so first, Maggie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you on the show. The introduction I got they said wonderful things about your sort of ability to extract and prioritize. And so I think, given the circumstances right now, it's so much more important for us to be prioritizing the highest impact activities. And so I'm curious, before we jump into, how you do that and breaking down, your superpower there. Talk to me about the way you see revenue enablement, and let's talk about definitions. I've had sales enablement, we've had sales ops, sales development, all these different sales or enablement or development terms on here. And so I just like to let's get our jargon straight. When you say revenue enablement, what are we talking about?
Sure. So there are a couple of different ways that you could probably think about the whole broader spectrum of revenue enablement, and a lot of that is based on how your company is organized. So I'm sure that some people that listen to this have their marketing and sales teams siloed. Some people have their customer success organizations completely spun off from their sales organizations, product, etc. The way that I personally think about revenue enablement is any organizations that impact the revenue of the larger team. And so for us at Convercent, that really starts in product. If you don't have the best product to sell, and you don't understand how to enable your internal folks, how to actually sell the product, then you're losing a section of enablement, a massive section of enablement. That then flows into how do we market the product. So if there are specific events, or if we have any podcasts, or if we have any type of networking scenario that's run out of, or collateral that's run out of our marketing team, we have to figure out how to enable our revenue impacting folks how to actually speak about that. And then of course there's sales. Most people think about revenue enablement solely in the silo of sales enablement, but it's quite larger than that. Obviously in sales enablement, there's the sales methodology, there's sales prospecting, there's sales tools, there's all of the things that impact your stages of the sales cycle. So sales enablement is really probably the chunkiest piece that people consider. And then I flow that into the definition of customer success enablement, because the customer success enablement section is really where you create your upsell motion. And so if your customers aren't happy, they're not going to continue paying, or they're not going to be able to purchase more. Churn is obviously not great for any of our organizations, especially right now. So that whole branch of teams are really genuinely impacted by true revenue enablement.
I'm getting anxiety just thinking about the topic of that is such a huge, wide umbrella. I understand why, having prioritization as a superpower would be especially effective right now. And I think anytime you're covering a whole revenue organization, the way you frame it out that way, there's so many. I'm just thinking through all the tech and all the tools that we use, and I'm like, it's quite a spectrum. And so if you're new to a role, so if I'm new to a role, or if I'm maybe the role feels new again because all the priorities have just shifted. How do you, when you start to think about what you need to prioritize first, how do you do that? What does your process look like?
So all of us, no matter what organization I think you've been with through this time, the last 8 to 10 weeks with COVID, all of us have had to shift our focus, our language, our message, our priorities, et cetera, to really become, or to focus on the areas of our businesses that are essential. And if we can't or don't have a section of our business that's essential, it's creating an essential product or service that comes out of that. And then how do we enable all of that group to fall in line with that essential piece of software, service, et cetera? And so the way that I really try to think about this are, what are the 3 infrastructural pillars? Well, I think of it as 3 infrastructural pillars to what people have to understand, no matter what role you're in: product, customer success, marketing, sales, human resources, et cetera. What are the 3 categories within the 3 pillars that you need to be able to do your job? So the first is really that knowledge pillar, the infrastructure that everything that we do in our role lie on top of. Is what knowledge do I need to understand to even do my job? What's my role? What are our buyer personas? What's the information about our market? What does our product do? What is our methodology, whether that's in product marketing? For us, we use pragmatic product marketing. For sales, what type of sales methodology do you leverage? Is it challenger? Is it value selling? We personally use force management, and then flowing out through that. And then the second is, what are the skills that are required for any role within your organization to optimize the knowledge pillar? So you continue to waterfall. And the third waterfall is the tools. So what tools can we use or train our teams on to actually optimize the skill, allow them to do the skill better, easier, faster, et cetera, in order to enable the knowledge pillar? And so really, when we refocus, there's 2 sides to it. A lot of organizations believe, or new folks in enablement believe, that it's okay to just come in and survey your leadership teams. Hey, sales directors, hey, customer success leaders, hey, product leaders, what do you want the teams to understand and learn? And then we'll build our program just from that. And if you've been in enablement for a period of time, you understand that, like, the key to great enablement is to get the buy-in from the people who are boots on the ground soldiers. And so it really all starts there, surveying the whole entire field to understand and optimize how your enablement program runs. So I'll pause there, because that really shapes how the larger focusing begins.
Yeah. I love how it starts with the sort of institutional knowledge and the methodologies behind basically the why behind you do, like the reasons why you do things. And then it's like, okay, what is the middleware, right? What are the skills that you need? And then at the very, very bottom are the tools that are going to optimize the skills. Because it seems like from your approach, what you're prioritizing is you need to know the why, and you need to know the soft skills before you can actually get any value out of the tools.
Completely. What I found early on, about 2 years ago, when I started in enablement, after having been in business development, I started my career in business development and then moved into enterprise sales. What I realized was, as I was coming out of a sales rep position into enablement, I was like, I know how to do all of the tactical things. And that is what tends to be what a lot of people don't understand how to do. So I was recently listening to your podcast with Christy Wall, talking about how do you extract information from people who understand, like have the tribal knowledge, can do the tactical stuff. But it's also so much bigger than that. And I think Christy hit on it really well. You have to be able to do that. But if you only built your enablement program on that, you'd miss all of the, again, infrastructural like pillars to why we even exist. And a lot of organizations just try to hit onboarding with, like, why do our customers buy what we sell? Because of us. They speak in our organization's language, rather than taking it as, like, what is the knowledge that our customers can glean from us? And it really flips the script on enablement as a whole.
Yeah, really interesting perspective there. And it was awesome having Christy on the podcast. If you haven't had a chance to check out her episode, I highly recommend you do. Or somebody that helps me with the podcast will find a link, and I'll put a note at the bottom of the show notes so that we throw that in there. Because we're 150 episodes deep now, and I've probably recorded another 10, 15 on top of that. And so I don't remember the numbers of all of them anymore. It was never numbers of podcasts was never my strong suit, and it certainly has gotten worse. So let's say I'm starting from scratch or redesigning a revenue enablement team. How do you organize all of these things into buckets so you can actually get something done and have an impact?
Okay, so first things first, again, like your 3 pillars, your knowledge, your skills, and your tools. As a new enablement leader, if you're just coming in, take inventory of all of the aspects that you believe sit within those 3 pillars. Again, knowledge might be something like product information, competitive differentiation, buyer personas, sales methodology, or product marketing methodology, the things that people have to know to be able to even like baseline their job. Skills could be something like, for customer success, how to run executive business reviews, or how to gather impactful success metrics from existing customers, right? Those types of areas that you recognize are targets within the customer journey that people might need help with evangelizing. And then third, and probably easiest, is your inventory of the tools that you use. What quote tool do you leverage? What CRM tool do you use? Do you use sales engagement platform like Outreach or Salesloft, LinkedIn, etc.? And so taking that inventory and really doing your due diligence and observing. Now, I have to admit, as a diehard salesperson, I had a really hard time being patient with just like listening to all of the sales calls that our reps had, or all of the team meetings that our leadership group had, because immediately you go out and say, I've done this before, I know exactly what we need. And in reality, again, like if it's not a group collaborative effort on what's going to make the highest impact immediately, you've lost a massive amount of value in your enablement program. And so I really, really hope that anybody listening to this that is struggling with creating an enablement program, go and sit in and listen. Don't speak. It's going to be so hard, so painful for a little bit, but truly it's one of the best things that you can do. And so take some time, organize, and I'm going to send out, or I think we'll attach an organization prioritization Excel spreadsheet that anybody can use following this. And then once you've really organized those aspects within those pillars, I survey. And so one way to aggregate and aggregate and consolidate all of the information that I found from simply listening is taking a survey of the level of impact that all of the boots on the ground soldiers want immediately. I use Microsoft Forms. You could use an LMS tool that you have like Lessonly or something like that. But overall, that looks like, hey, here are the knowledge gaps. What knowledge gaps, rank in order, do you feel would be most impactful for you in your role as X? Product marketing, customer success, sales. Here are the skills that we found over the course of the last month in listening are the highest impact. How would you rate them? And then in order to actually organize those, because as any of you listening can imagine, you're probably thinking to yourself, and all of them are high impact. So how do we not do all of them immediately, right? What you find is different people rate them differently. Of course, that's what you want. You want a diversity in the people that you have on your team. But what we did then was we took the top 4 from each section and we said, okay, we just implemented Outreach and nobody knows how to use it. And we weren't really prospecting beforehand. So that is a huge area of opportunity for us. Or we've got a ton of issues with our CPQ tool. We have too many SKUs. We don't know how to use it, etc. And we organize them in a list and we pull a vote. So each revenue leader only gets their top 3 votes. And at the end of that, we're selecting what's tangible for somebody in revenue enablement like myself as the sole person on the Convercent revenue enablement team. How many actual like training sessions or infrastructural knowledge pillars can I attack immediately? And so usually that falls within like 3. So we do 1 every quarter of a truly like meaty, chunky training. And so once it's gotten to that, what we find is the boots on the ground folks have their vote because we organize them based on the top 4, and the leadership team has their vote because they've organized it in a group consensus. So it's really like the best version of present day democracy.
I'm not going to transition or take the bite to transition this into a political podcast. Being a Canadian, I know effectively nothing about all that's going on other than what I see in late night TV. So not somebody I should be qualified to comment on anything other than our prime minister looks gorgeous doing all of his daily briefing videos.
Amazing.
Yeah, there's one that I'm sure made its way all across Canada, but he was outside. He does all his briefings outside. And it was windy and his hair is all down and he's got kind of long hair. And he did the basic, like, I'm going to comb my hair out of my eyes, but somebody slowed it down and it looks like the most dramatic, like he makes eye contact with the camera. He's so serious, so intent, just flicks his hair back. And
that is awesome.
Yeah.
They
obviously
watch
I don't,
live.
yeah, totally, 100%. And so great little segue to talk about like the difference. This feels like a very proactive approach. I imagine coming into an organization, it would be so easy to just say, I'm going to start by surveying everybody and then say, okay, what do I need to do first? And then everybody is saying, oh, well, this needs to get done. This needs to get done. And really it's this kind of dual democracy piece, if I could describe it that way, is your sort of solution to, I guess, understanding how to prioritize. This is what the like the people on the this level need. This is what the senior team needs, and this is what I think needs to get done. Completely,
you clarified it perfectly.
So let's dive into the process here, because it sounds like I'd love to know more. Like where do we start with this? Who do I talk to? When do I start having those conversations?
So I think it always, again, depending on your definition of revenue enablement and what you as a revenue enablement leader are responsible for, it really begins there. So for me personally, my initial area of focus was just the sales team. And so at Convercent, we had rolled out, prior to my time, we'd rolled out a new sales methodology that was fantastic. But as you can imagine, the retention of any sales methodology takes a lot of grit and hard work and continuous effort. And then we turned a lot of the folks on our BDR team, not intentionally, just like change of priorities, et cetera. And so there was this new BDR organization that we had to optimize. And so I looked at that as, how do we first and foremost like attack the sales realm? So of course, who do we talk to? We have to talk to the individual contributors. So I would sit in on as many sales calls as I possibly could and ask so many questions. Like, so how come we took the conversation that way instead of taking it this way? i.e., why didn't you ask this person for who else might be involved? Because that equals multi-threading, which is a skill that is infrastructural to doing the sales role, right? And so organizing that first is why it's so important. The second is immediately set your one-on-one time with each of the sales leaders. So the BDR leader, each of the direct sales team leaders, and understand how they currently coach their team. What are they struggling with? What do they personally retain from the sales methodology that they were trained on? Because that will indicate to you, are they even able to retain this in a group setting? So that gets into a whole other realm, which you have other podcasts on around leadership enablement, which is so badass when you can get it right. But that really helps dictate, like, here are the areas of opportunity that I see based on just the general retention of these skills. Like, am I climbing an uphill battle with trying to ask our sales leaders to retain the information for me? Or is this like a common piece of knowledge that people already have?
Gotcha.
And oh, go ahead.
Nope. I was just going to say,
I,
it sounds like the movie Twister, where they want to shove that I don't know, the truck with what looks like a hot water tank in the back and all those little balls, so you can get the measurements of inside the tornado, right? You want to see, you got to see what's going on inside before you can make any predictions as to where it's going to go. Not in the case that they were trying to control the tornado, but wouldn't that have made a great sequel?
Completely. It would have made a good sequel. I think that speaks directly to data too, because if we as enablement folks are scared to look at the storm underneath it all, like what is the data actually telling us, say about conversion rates or average sales cycle or closed win percentages, like all of those types of things based on every single sales rep, then it's really hard to match the data to the enablement priorities that you have. That goes for product enablement as well. Like if a certain product or service isn't selling as well as others, what's happening down the line, whether with our customers in close won, close lost analysis calls, or what's happening with our sales team. Do they not believe in the product, trust the product, et cetera? Does it not work? All of the above. So you have to look at the data in the beginning to prioritize anything.
It's a really interesting parallel. As you've been describing your process, I've been thinking about our company's been going through the EOS process. And one of the things throughout that process is one of the first things that you're forced to do is an accountability matrix, where you lay out everybody in the organization and here basically their job description, but here are the things that they're accountable for. And it sounds like in a similar way, you're kind of doing a very similar mapping. But instead of looking at like, what are they accountable for, is what are the skills and what are their priorities? And so you're doing this like priorities mapping. And then basically you're picking just the people that you like and then prioritizing their stuff.
You're picking people that you like and prioritize. Yeah, no. You could do it that way.
Probably
like,
not.
You just threw me off.
Yeah, no, sorry. So you're basically, you're creating the map. You're creating this like, I guess, priorities map, and not just a priorities map, but a competencies map. So if you're thinking about, okay, well, how do I, like, if I'm looking at this manager as a filter, right? Do I trust them as a strong filter for what we need because they know X, Y, and Z, or are they a very weak filter because they went through this training and they've remembered nothing?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I think it also falls into like we as revenue leaders in general can't do our job without the impact of other teams. Like especially for revenue enablement, my job as a leader is to lead through general influence across departments rather than specifically to my own department. And I think that bridges another conversation again around leadership enablement, but it's so crazy important to your point to take inventory. Like, is this person even, do they have the ability to retain the information, train the information, have the conversation again? Like after every single training that I do, I send out a whole retention brochure. Like literally, here's the questions that you ask in your one-on-one meetings. Here's the data that you look for in your leadership forecast reviews. Like this is how you can work on how to retain this, because we're not just making this a priority for this 1 month. Like if we're going to train on this and we're going to choose it as a priority, we have to figure out a way to thread it through every single thing that we do. That I think is so crazy important and impactful to the success of your enablement program as a whole.
Totally agree. A friend of mine has I don't know if e-learning is the right way to describe it, but startup, and they're rocketing right now. And I remember he would always go on about sort of timed repetition as one of the biggest elements of learning, specifically when it came to like an e-learning platform. And so I'm curious, the way that you were just talking about sort of weaving it into the one thing that you do as an organization, can you talk to me about that retention side of things? Like how do you, I guess, encourage that? And what are you like, let's get specific about what are you coaching the people on that team to do differently than they would?
So we have quite a few like first-time people leaders. So I might be in a unique scenario, but at my last company, it was not the same. So it was a lot of folks who had been in a sales leadership role for a while. So you might have a different situation just based on where you're at and the tenure of your people. And honestly, like the ego of your sales leaders or any leaders. I shouldn't even say sales leaders alone, but that is absolutely something that plays into the coaching of anybody. So first and foremost, like one area of opportunity that we saw is because we have so many first-time leaders, just the general like understanding of what good one-on-one coaching and then team coaching looks like as a leader was going to be the stopgap of if they could even retain information or help the retention of information at all. And so with the rollout of the prioritization calendar, like after everybody had voted and after we had chosen our select 3 priorities for Q1, I came to the table saying, and on top of this, every single week, we're going to do leadership coaching training around our sales methodology, because that's the largest area of impact as sales leaders that we can have to all speak the same language, get on the same page, and like understand how our peers are coaching their people. And so we started that back in February with the beginning of our Q1. And then with that, as a preface to every single training that we do, there's a communication around it. So here's what we're going to cover. Here's the podcast that I want you to listen to. Here's the article that I want you to read. Here's the book that I want you to go buy, like anything like that, well in advance, so that people are starting to prepare for what information they're going to get. And I mean that from the sales leader perspective too. Like it's an absolute expectation of sales leaders. For the individual contributors, it's like, hey, this is going to be really helpful to set the tone for what this conversation is going to be. Mm-hmm. And I'm, of course, going to ask you questions about it because that's the type of enablement leader that I am. And then as a tack on to that, on the tail end, it's really, hey, here's the recording of all of this. And if you like need to double click into any area that was somehow confusing, go back and watch. And here is exactly like the way that we're retaining this, i.e. questions that you can ask in relation to this specific topic, but also here's a spiff for a leader and for a team, i.e. we're going to talk through multi-threading in today's training. By the end of the quarter, we're going to look at the reps that have at least 3 contacts within all of their opportunities. Because right now, all of you only have an average of 1. So what does it look like to actually do that, right? So what does it look like to actually measure that? And then, of course, because it's that stiff and we're reporting on it every single week in our revenue stand-up, people are like, oh, shit, Maggie was serious. We're actually going to look at this stuff. And the leaders are saying, I don't want my team to lose.
Interesting. And so if I can just try and pare it back, your process here a little bit, just to help me digest it myself, because this is super interesting. You've identified, let's say in organization 1, you've identified a sort of, we've got a lot of first-time leaders. And so you've said, okay, I want to spend some time leadership coaching. Then it sounds like you found, in addition to the regular curriculum that you're committing to for the quarter, you identified, okay, this is something that needs to be addressed. What it looks like tactically is, it sounds like weekly you're going to share a podcast, a book, and blog post, something for them to listen to. Then there's going to be a bit of a training session. Here's where I'm a bit blurry. So you tell me to listen to this podcast, then what happens next?
Yep. So for leaders specifically, we ask them to I ask them to actually review certain material. And every single Friday, we have a session where we discuss the material, what we learned from it. We gather feedback from our chief revenue officer, our head of strategy as longtime leaders of people. And then we actually practice a lot of role play. So one area, I actually didn't mention this. Thank you for bringing it back up. One area of opportunity I think a lot of sales leaders have is when you're in the actual role, you get a ton of role play, whether it's just with your teammates or in training sessions with your enablement group, or it's on the phone with actual customers. Whereas leaders don't get that type of role play. Like a lot of chief revenue officers or VPs of sales aren't getting on their one-on-ones and saying, hey, let's talk through how you're going to coach Maggie out of or into this specific behavior. Let's literally go and role play it. And so that is how we operate every single week as a leadership team.
Now, is this as a senior leadership team, as a revenue leadership team? Like what kind of level, like who all is involved there?
So it started as solely revenue leadership. So our heads of direct sales, our head of BDR, our head of marketing, and our CRO, and our head of sales operations, excuse me. And then it branched into our head of product strategy, who's a co-founder, our head of product marketing, and our two heads of customer success. So now now we're actually bridging it to that revenue enablement spectrum. We're opening it up because people actually love role playing. It's anxiety ridden, but like people love being able to practice.
Awesome. And so if I can bring it back to the initial structure, it's you've decided there's a gap. I pick some content to address that gap, whether it's a book, a podcast, et cetera. I give them lots of leeway. So you're doing this every week. So are you saying, okay, here's the homework for next week then kind of thing?
Exactly.
Perfect.
And go apply what you learned today.
Yeah.
And come back, and where we're starting next Friday is what happened when you actually applied this.
Oh, interesting. And so that's how you're not multi-threading, but you're sort of that timed repetition. You're reinforcing it. It's not just a one and done. It's we're going to do some training here, and then next week, like AA, we're going to talk about how our week went, and did we succeed or fail. I love the fact that you've picked the gap, you picked the content, you've included in the role playing. The senior team, and you're right. The more senior you get, the less likely you are to be role playing for your benefit as opposed to somebody else's. And then you mentioned that you've got some questions and then the spiff. And so you've got questions for like, this seems like a pop quiz, or like, so I can assess whether or not, so you can assess whether or not somebody retained that. When do those questions come into play?
Okay. So for the leadership training specifically, everything on the front end of what you said is exactly correct and true. For the sales trainings, we do a really similar thing. We give preparatory work, we do the session, we then give the spiff, we do some form of role play, etc. The questions come into play after the sales trainings with the larger team. And so when we're doing a whole organization or all sales training around, for example, multi-threading, my communication plan following that is I send the sales leaders a list of questions that they can be accomplishing or asking in their one-on-ones or in their team meetings to continue the prioritization of that initiative.
Gotcha. Interesting. And so I love it. It's like you're a curriculum designer helping teachers, and you're like, hey, I expect you to teach your team this, and I'm gonna be there to make sure that you're following the best practices. Because if you're a frontline sales leader, you don't have probably a ton of time to be researching what are the best educational principles for, getting people this and that. You're kind of spoon feeding it to them. We're not spoon feeding it, but you're their Iron Man suit. You're helping them do more with the same resources. So that's really cool. And then I love the piece about the SPEF. We're dealing, especially when you're dealing with salespeople. I'm not sure how well it would work on the senior marketing team with new behaviors of like, hey, you got to do this one-on-one, and every time you do it, we're going to give you a spiff if you do it a certain way. But for certainly on the sales team, because you're right, we are inherently. I'm grouping myself in as sales folk because that's how I was raised. But basically, who's winning, whose team is getting the most spiffs, what individuals are getting the most spiffs. I think that's a great way to sort of, I guess, for the organization to put the money where the mouth is. It's not just about, I'm going to do this one training and then see you later. It's we're going to give you something to read. We're going to have a discussion. We're going to role play about it. I'm going to give your leader some questions, and then I'm going to incentivize you. So you've got these sort of 5 points where you're touching or reinforcing or shaping their learning, which is really impactful.
And honestly, Collin, what I think I'm actually the most proud of in relation to like getting it all the way back around to the beginning of this conversation of prioritization is it can be so hard for folks in a role like mine who, again, lead across departments to really want to please people and like be reactive to every single request that comes in around training, or if you're in marketing around content, or if you're in product around product feature sets, etc. And what I've been the most proud of is in laying it out this way and giving people very clear expectations that do not change no matter what we are training on has been so crazy influential to how our revenue leadership organization now thinks about how we go to our market with information. Like in our Q2 enablement priorities vote, because we do this every single quarter now, in our Q2 enablement priorities vote, our customer success leadership and our sales leadership said to me, I don't want to do more than 3 things. That's crazy. Like most of the time, what you hear is, can we have this piece of collateral that leads to this buyer enablement, that leads to this mutual action planning, that leads to this prospecting, that leads to blah, 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 blah. And it's so hard to get it all in one tangible, swallowable like piece. And it's so cool to see how that's impacted how the larger revenue organization thinks about our people's mind share.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like you've had a real impact there in being that anchor to slow people down and say, I want to have a really high do-say ratio. And in order to accomplish that, I got to figure out what are the smallest number of things that I can do that are going to have the greatest impact. And then I'm going to make sure 110% that I hit all of those and deliver all those. And it sounds like other people are picking up on that.
Yeah. And you'll see in the spreadsheet that will be attached, there's also an area of that's level of effort. Like level of impact is always number one. And what you'll find is like everybody thinks everything is the highest level of impact, no matter what you're doing, what it is. But then it's also taking into consideration how big of a lift is this? How many people are helping with it? Like put it on them too. Like everybody is accountable for the enablement of people. If you only think about the enablement of people as being your enablement team, then I would highly suggest doing a larger leadership focus, like what is true leadership? Because enablement of people is the responsibility of every single one of us as revenue leaders.
Amazing. Maggie, I think this would be a great place to end the podcast normally, but you've got this template that this is something that you use internally. And so I'll throw it out there. If you don't want the geeky details and you're walking and you can't see the screen, thanks for showing up. We'll see you next week. If you want to hang out with Maggie and myself, she's going to share her screen for a bit. We'll throw a link in the show notes so you can get a copy of her of the spreadsheet that she's created for us. Then check it out there and hang out. And Maggie, let's just walk us through what this sheet is and how we use it.
Sure. Share my screen.
Yeah, let's do it. This is always my favorite part. Like, show me how you do all these things.
Okay, so I'm going to show you the blank template and how I have organized this previously. And then should you want to at all, I have obviously my template for what this looks like when it's fully baked. And feel free to contact. I'm happy to walk through this with anybody. Overall, I've put in, again, so our 3 pillars. We have our knowledge pillar, our skill pillar, and our tool pillar. If you're an enablement leader or a leader period and you think of other pillars, fantastic. Just make sure you're not trying to boil the ocean. So I always try to break it into 3. I've already put in some potential topic lines into each of those. So again, I've mentioned this at the beginning. What is our industry knowledge, our product knowledge, et cetera? How about skills? Okay, so a common skill for everybody is objection handling or negotiation. Might be time management. That's something that we at Convercent are focusing on in Q2. I'm really excited about that. And then tools. So this might be different for everybody, but most organizations have a specific CRM, a quote tool, a sales engagement platform, etc. Now, you'll see that I organized this based on level of effort, LOE, and level of impact, LOI. And I personally color code this by high level of effort or impact is green, medium is yellow, low is blue. The only reason I didn't choose red in there is because red can sometimes seem like, oh my God, do this immediately. So I wanted to make it a little less harsh. So once you've organized each of the assets within your pillars, we're color coding. Now, when I initially did this, I pulled this on my own first. I said, here's what I believe is the level of effort and level of impact based on what I know of our sales leadership team, what I know of the tools that we have to optimize it, what I know of my ability to even train on this or my knowledge, and what I understand of like the larger organization having the ability to focus. Then I organized that a little bit further. So this seems really overwhelming probably, but all of these things say the same exact, say the same exact, have the same exact text. So again, we have our knowledge pillars and we have our topics. We have our skill pillars and our topics and our tool pillars and our topics. This, you'll carry over your level of effort and level of impact color coding because that's really the basis of organizing this whole entire sheet. Because that's going to say, okay, is this actually going to have the highest level of impact? Or is this going to be a 6-month project instead of a 1-month training? The way that I organize this is what groups are impacted by doing this specific thing, by training on this specific topic area or creating a program around this specific topic area. Now, you can probably imagine if you're listening to this, the reason for that is if it spans multiple departments, it's probably much higher impact, but also much higher level of effort. However, if we organize that and we're pulling a survey or a vote from multiple different groups, this is a really good thing for leadership to see. We organize that next on who can help me. Again, I am the lone person in revenue enablement at Convercent. I cannot just muscle this whole entire program up on my own. It's been hard, but I've had to learn delegation. And so who are the subject matter experts within the organization that we already have, again, to Christy's point, who have the tribal knowledge, who understand that can help with this training initiative? What stage of any cycle, whether sales cycle, product marketing cycle, customer journey cycle, does this impact? Now, this is something that a lot of people actually tend to leave out just because they're not conscious of why it's so important. But when you look at the data to the tune of what we were talking about at the beginning of this, when you look at the data, usually you can find some really clear areas of opportunity within your cycles of your methodology. So for example, Convercent has stage, or your pursuit stage, your lead stage, all the way to your closure stage of your sales cycle. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, why do we tend to have a really low conversion percentage from our stage 3 to our stage 4? That's our close cycle. So were we not qualifying early? Were we not multi-threading? Did we not have the right champion? All of those things become questions that we can ask and organize based on where this impacts the most. So this stage affected is really critical based on data.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I like that. Makes sense.
Yeah. That's been super helpful for just like revenue leaders to be like, oh, this piece of data directly impacts this specific topic area for enablement. So Maggie's not like off in that twister land by herself, like trying to figure out how to organize all of this and impact the key metrics that actually drive our sales.
Perfect.
I then organize training methodology. So like, how are we actually going to get this done? Is it through our LMS system? Is it through an in-person training? Are we doing some type of boot camp around it? That's like a full program. And then how do we measure it? So this is probably the most important for a lot of sales or revenue enablement leaders. I'm pretty sure, Collin, you guys have a couple of other podcasts around truly measuring the enablement program and like how to effectively measure success. And this is where all of that comes in. Are you doing certifications? Are you doing written assessments? Is it based on the data? Is it conversion rates, NPS scores of customers, win rates based on your product line, etc.? So you really want to get clear with how you're going to measure this over the course of time. And then what do you need? Do you need digital signage to optimize or evangelize like the internal psyche of people when you're back in the office? Do you need content from marketing to help you? Do you need APIs to organize how this product is going to connect? So all of those types of things are what you want to be really conscious of before you even go to present this. Because this as an enablement leader is going to tell you, okay, this is how much I have to do, or this is the area that I actually don't understand about this specific topic, skill, tool, or knowledge.
Gotcha.
And then the last page is just the scoring. So based on what you select, out of 1, 2, and 3, how does that scoring based on your stakeholders pan out?
Interesting. And then you could, so that gives you that insight into like who cares about what and when, so that when you do complete something like, hey, Bob, we did this thing for you.
That's right. And what I normally take it a step further. I'll show you really quick. So this is mine. So you can see here's my Q1 scoring, Q1 revenue enablement. Here's like what we focused on. And then I actually take it one step further and usually build out the calendar of when that's going to happen.
Very cool.
So then all of my sales leaders, all revenue leaders have access to this and they can see what this larger enablement calendar is. And then we go into Q2, etc.
Gotcha. And so that's awesome. So the piece that you like the second tab there, that was your 2020. Then you would then break that down based on the scoring and say, okay, here's what my quarterly looks like. But here's roughly the plan for the year.
That's right.
Okay. This is awesome. And I could keep asking you questions forever and this would turn into a 3-hour podcast. So I'm going to try and be brief. So last couple, just to triangulate, because I really appreciate you coming on, want to be respectful of your time.
Sure.
Do you ever update your, like you set the 2020 plan, or maybe that's the plan when you first started? Like, is this something that are you going through a small version of this exercise quarterly to update the priorities, or is it sort of set and forget?
No, we go through it every single quarter. So we come back to the main survey at the beginning of the year, at the tail end of every single quarter, so that we can vote for the following quarter. And that also allows us to be agile with whatever's going on in the world. So you can imagine our Q2 enablement priority checklist was really different than what it was in Q1 because we have to dodge and weave all of the crazy stuff that's happening in our environment right now.
Yeah, that's totally fair. One last question, and I hope it doesn't take us on too much of a tangent, but I'd love to just end it here. That survey that we've talked about it a couple of times. Can you talk to me a little bit about what's on that survey?
Yeah. So I start every single thing that I do in enablement with the same exact question. And that question is, what is one thing that you cannot make any more of? And that is time. And so the whole survey is organized based on where do you currently spend your time and where do you want to spend your time as an individual contributor, especially. But we also, the survey is the same for the sales leaders. And so the way that that's organized is, okay, here are the knowledge pillars. What do you feel like your time is going to be the most optimized based on understanding? Buyer personas, competitive differentiation. Same with skills, same with tools. Organize them in an order of highest value to you, lowest value to you, based on what you feel you understand. And then it goes into where do you currently spend a majority of your time? And common for most sales organizations, that could be on the phone prospecting, which it's usually not. It could be in the quote tool. It could be trying to update information in Salesforce or Oracle, etc. And so then we try to organize, like, where are people not getting time back right now? Because if we can do anything to impact the data and the like true knowledge that they need to understand how to do their jobs, then we're giving them time back to do what they want to do, and everybody's happy. So it's really organized like that. We just ask them to basically pull their interests in order.
Gotcha. So it's where do you spend your time? Where would you like to spend your time? And then stack rank, basically taking your 3 pillars and then the different sub bullets that you've identified underneath them and said, can you stack rank these in order of priority?
Exactly. I also added 2 additional questions to our first survey, which were based around the retention of our sales methodology. Because what I had heard was it wasn't retained as well as it could have been. And so, like, on a scale of 1 to 4, how well do you feel like you understand or can execute upon our sales methodology? Always use 4 because there's no middle. That's a key hint. And then the second one was, what would you ask of enablement, or how do you think of enablement today?
Gotcha. Perfect. So then you're opening up, and that's something that is that something you do annually? Or is that just I'm new, I want to get a pulse check here?
I haven't gotten there yet, to be honest, Collin. I might do it again. I think it'd be a really good exercise to do again because it helps everybody feel like they're bought into the same program. But I haven't even gotten there. I'm trying to get through the next 20 minutes so I can have a glass of wine.
Totally fair. Well, let me help you get to that glass of wine, because if there was no natural end to these podcasts, I would just keep asking questions and then we'd be 6 hours in and there'd be nothing usable. But I would know everything I needed to know from you. But yeah. So I do want to say thank you so much for coming on the show. We'll upload a link, probably throw it in Google Sheets so everybody can just download a CSV or a copy of that spreadsheet however they like, or make a copy. If people are looking to get in touch with you and say thank you for being on the show, ask it if they've got any questions, or if they've just want to say thanks for sharing and creating that sheet for us, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Feel free to shoot me a note on LinkedIn or a connection on LinkedIn. It's Maggie Callahan, and I work for Convercent, so I'm sure there are other Maggie Callahans around. But yeah, LinkedIn's going to be the best.
Perfect. I'm just found your LinkedIn. I'm going to throw a link in the show notes there. And thank you so much for coming on the show, Maggie. And Outbound Sales Team.
Thanks for having me, Collin.